Okay, this Hangout on Air is live. Welcome vJUG members. Welcome vJUG members to the first live vJUG, and by live vJUG I mean in a live room with a live studio audience. This is welcome to Geek Out UK, a conference run by Zero Turnaround, currently in London. We've been having an awesome day, awesome food, awesome beer, and awesome talk about productivity. Also, one thing which I want to mention before we start is that we've just reached a big milestone in the virtual JUG. Last week, we reached 1 year old. We also have over 2,000 members on the virtual JUG. So, welcome everyone. Thank you, everyone. It's been an awesome year. We've had 22 sessions. This is the 23rd session that we've had on the vJUG. We've had over 55,000 views online. The most viewed session was a Java 8 session by Simon Ritter, who was also speaking here today at the Geek Out UK, and he's had over 13,000 views. So it's been a really, really superb year, and we're looking to break some more records next year. So, without further ado, this is weird. Where's Oliver?
Is he there?
He is here, but he's normally on the vJUG with me. Oh well. Oh well. The session is we've all got beers here. I hope you guys have got relevant drinks in your hands and on the vJUG as well. Today is a session. Hey, nice one, Ed. Today is a session about all things Java, future of Java, the JCP, Adopt-a-JSR, Adopt OpenJDK maybe. And the first person I'm going to introduce you to is Heather. Heather, whereabouts are you these days?
Hello, I'm in the Bay Area. That's where I am today.
So if you want to do a quick introduction and then tell us what we're going to do today.
Okay, my name's Heather Van and I manage Java process office. I can hear really good.
Simon, you probably want to mute your mic whenever unmute your mic only when you're talking.
Okay.
There you go.
So, yeah. So that's what I do, and I'm also a leader with Adopt-a-JSR, and today we're going to have a panel discussion about Adopt-a-JSR and how you can participate, and we're going to hear from several different perspectives. Participants from Java user groups, from spec leads, and from Java EE evangelists. So it's going to be a cool talk. Turn it back to you, Simon. That's all I can say about me right now. Should we introduce Ed Burns next? Should we turn it over to Ed? Because you're still on mute, Simon.
I know. I was just speaking very silently. That's what it was. So yeah, let's go through the virtual panel first, and then we'll talk through London panel. So let's talk. I've got Arun first here on my list. So Arun, welcome to the third or fourth time on the vJUG, I think maybe.
Yeah, I think this is probably the fourth time. Yeah.
A bit about yourself for the 2% of people who don't know you.
Yeah, well, my name is Arun Gupta. I work for Red Hat. I'm the Director for Developer Outreach. That is anything to do with JBoss Middleware. I'm just about close to a year at Red Hat now. Prior to that, I spent about 15 years at Sun and then Oracle. My last job at Oracle was driving the Java E7 launch for Oracle, and I was very actively involved with driving the Adopt-a-JSR effort, as part of which I worked with 20 Java user groups, and they contributed very actively to the JCP at different levels.
Awesome, thanks Arun. And Ed, over to you. You're on mute, by the way.
Hi everyone. My name's Ed Burns, and I am here to represent the Oracle Java spec leads. And I've been involved in JCP for a very long time, and I've always enjoyed interacting with the community, and I consider it the best part of the job is when I get to leverage the ideas that the community has and bring them into the Java platform in a way that fits well and also delivers value. And I'm really excited to have a chance to talk at the vJUG. I know, Simon, I noticed when you started it up, and I'm glad to see you've had some success with it. and it's been growing and growing, and that's good. And I also consider myself a friend of ZT, having been involved with what you guys have been doing since JAX 2010.
Awesome, thanks very much. Let's go now to our wonderful panel. Can we get some lights on the panel?
More lights.
No, the panel, top lights rather than down lights. So let's unmute here. So unmute here. Trish.
Yes. I'm Trisha. I'm a Java developer.
Can everyone else mute themselves? I'm on mute. Can everyone else mute themselves?
And apparently I'm infected by aliens. Yes, I'm in London for 1 week only. I'm normally based out of Spain, where I pretend to run the civil Java and scripts, but in actual fact Israel runs them. And to be part of the, well, still am part of the Java community. With his hands, yes.
Okay, so I'm Oleg. So I work for Zero Turnaround, and I'm mostly doing a little bit of engineering work, and I work for Rebel Labs, like content division, let's say, even for Turnaround. What else I do? I cause trouble versions and ask tricky questions often.
Help organize conferences.
Yeah, so I do lots of small things.
Martijn?
Hi, I'm Martijn. I help run the London Java community. We have a seat on the Java community process, which is basically the Java standards body. And we try and represent the voice of the angry developer. These days, not the angry developer. So yeah, we sort of try and help developer advocacy, I guess.
Hi, I'm Mani. By day, I'm a Java developer, and in my free time, I involve myself in a lot of LJC activities. And specifically, I've been helping a lot of Java developers understand OpenJDK and louder, and how to build Java and understand how the JVM works, or at least look at the source code and how to go about building Java, basically, and helping them understand OpenJDK. And how to contribute to the OpenJDK.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, guys. And I'm going to hand over to Heather to give us an agenda.
Okay. Well, I thought I'd do an overview about Adopt-a-JSR, and then we'll start with the live panel and get some perspectives on what the LJC has done with Adopt-a-JSR and Adopt OpenJDK, and then we'll hear from our panelists on the virtual side of things, from Ed about his perspective as a spec lead working on the Java EE specs, and then from Arun working as a developer evangelist, about how we can engage the community and get more developer participation into the development of standards through the JCP. So that's the agenda. And I can share a screen share with, can you see my screen now? Okay. I think you can see it now. So, yes. So this year, vJUG is celebrating 1 year. The JCP is celebrating 15 years. And as we've gone through kind of an opening up process over the last 3-4 years especially, we've evolved to make the JCP more open and transparent and participatory than it ever was before. So we've had kind of this convergence of two things happening at the same time. We've had the JCP opening up and making it more transparent to the Java developer community, allowing more access into the development of the JSRs, allowing people to participate through wikis and discussion forums and issue trackers, public voting, lots of public drafts, And at the same time, we've also had a Java user group-led initiative, which this panel will focus on today, called Adopt-a-JSR. And it's fitting that we're talking about it today in the vJUG session with the participants from the LGJC, since the London Java community really was the initiator of this idea with Java in Brazil, to bring Java developer groups from around the world together and participate more fully in the standards development process. So we had these two things coming together at the same time around 2011, 2012. So it's been a couple of years now. You can go to adopt-a-JSR.org for details, but as Arun alluded to earlier, we've got almost 30 Java user groups now participating in this program. Java user groups from around the world in almost every continent, working on about 30 JSRs, contributing significantly to several of the Java major releases that we've had over the last 2 years in 2013 and 2014, both the Java EE7 release as well as the Java SE8 release that Simon Ritter spoke to you about earlier this year. So significant community contributions to these as a result of the JCP opening up through the jcp.next effort, as well as a significant push from the Java user groups to really get involved in the standards development process. As I mentioned before, it really is a two-way street, and that's why I think this panel is a great opportunity to hear from both the leaders of the standards as well as the Java user groups and the everyday developers who are using these standards, that they work together to create better standards for everyone in the future. So I will start with kind of the adopter experience and ask the panel there in person in London about the types of activities that the LJC has engaged in to support both Adopt-a-JSR and Adopt OpenJDK. So some of the activities that you've done and some of the experiences that you've had, and then we'll kind of shift to what maybe your plans are for the future and how we might get more developer engagement into the future releases of Java EE8 and Java SE9. So I will stop sharing so everyone can see the panelists. So can we switch it back to the local? Yeah. And I'll mute myself now.
Hi. Are we going to echo? No, we're good. Excellent. Cool. Yeah, so the London Java community started getting involved in Java standards probably about 3 years ago. It started with us just simply complaining about the state of standards at the time. We really didn't like JSPs 1.0. We didn't like date and time version 1. We didn't like calendar version 2. We didn't like JMS. We didn't like EJBs, and so on and so forth. So we started off with complaining, which, to be fair, wasn't very helpful. We then got to the next stage where we were told, instead of just complaining, why don't you actually help solve the actual underlying problems? So we joined, and we initially thought that the Java user groups with 400,000 members around the world could actually provide the code, the genuine technology to go out and build the new standards and build what it is that developers really need. I think we've discovered over the last 2 years that most developers actually make fairly poor language architects and fairly poor library designers. It's a different skill, it's a different discipline, I should say. But what we are very, very good at is going out and testing those standards when they're nice and early. So when a new standard like the WebSockets API came out for Java EE, having all of the Java user groups around the world, 200-300 developers go and hammer that specification to pieces early in its lifespan and help drive what the design of the API was going to look like, help figure out if there were nasty bugs in the reference implementation for that API. I think that's where probably we found our sweet spot in terms of helping Java standards. So I think most people can agree, for example, with Java 8, the date and time API for once is the date and time API which actually truly works for developers. And the reason was because the London Java community got together, I think it was about 18 months ago, had a massive workshop over 2 days with Stephen Colvin, spec leads, just ran across the whole API, tried lots of different use cases, gave feedback on what would work and what wouldn't work, and that carried through to Java 8. And a lot has happened in the Java EE space as well. And so this is what we're going to encourage going forward to the future. We would like to see Java user groups from around the world with different cultures, different experiences, test out new reference implementations, test out new specifications, and give feedback to the spec leads and expert groups nice and early, so we don't get disasters like the original version of JSF, the first attempt at Java effects, which was horrific, so on and so forth. So it's a bit of a selfish lead. If you want to see Java and Java EE evolve into the way you want it to go, then start running its workshops. And I've talked too much.
Okay, so Manny can share a little bit about what the LJC did with Adopt OpenJDK. Maybe share some of your experiences running the workshops.
So I think next month it's going to be 3 years since LJC has consistently been contributing to OpenJDK in various forms, mainly holding hack days. So I remember the first hack day 3 years ago when Martijn and a few other LJC members got together and showed us how do you build OpenJDK and all the things you need to know and all the difficulties we had basically building. And we've come a long way since then, and it's mainly LJC that's been pushing this forward. A lot of contributions gone from the LJC in the form of feedback on the mailing list, the various mailing lists, the OpenJDK mailing list, which actually has helped improve the build system, and then from there on the other aspects as well. So today we have lots of LJC members, Java developers who know now how to build OpenJDK on their virtual machine or locally on their machine. They know now how to write tests, and basically they are becoming budding OpenJDK developers for the next generation. So I'm thinking next year onwards they should be able to contribute to patches, and all of this has come through consistent effort from the LJC leaders, and also going to other conferences and helping the other members from other JUGs. Like last year we were heavily involved with Sofia, with Java Land in Germany. This year we have plans in DevOps. Next year again in Java Land and Sofia as well this year. So we're constantly basically going and spreading the news. We've got lots of documentation now, which we didn't have. Also comes from a lot of contribution from LJC members, but also from other members from other JUGs worldwide. So it's basically been a joint effort between LJC and other JUG leaders. Of course, the JCP has been supporting us all the way through. So thanks for that.
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, I think that's a good point that, yeah, it has taken the LJC stepping up and taking the leadership role, but it also, trying to get the user groups around the world to work together and to collaborate. So it's a great opportunity for your user group to work with other people in different parts of the world as well and share your knowledge. So I've been happy to see how well that the user groups have worked together to come together to make Java better. And I think even Simon has talked about maybe somehow getting the virtual JUG involved in Adopt-a-JSR. I don't know. Maybe Trisha wants to know what she might think of how that would help someone who's moved away from the LJC and has been involved in the program.
Sorry, could you repeat the last 5 seconds?
As Trisha was involved in the Adopt-a-JSR effort with LJC, and I know she's moved away now, any thoughts on how we might work in the future to get people who aren't engaged in a local Java user group engaged in the Adopt-a-JSR program?
It's a really good question. It was a lot easier to get started in the London Java community because we had a lot more members, and we knew that if you only have like 6 or 7 people interested, you've got like 2,000 people, you get 6 or 7 people interested, you can sort of kickstart something, you can bootstrap it more easily. I think one of the challenges we have in a much smaller user group is, for a start, making people aware. Some of the stuff we started originally with the LJC, I remember doing a lot of lightning talks about what is the JCP, what are JSRs, what do these different acronyms mean, what does it mean to be on the executive committee, a lot of this education piece. And then there's another education piece to remind developers that for example, OpenJDK is open source, more or less. Well, it's open source, but it's difficult to get into. And the fact that the Java community process means that normal developers can get involved with the development of Java earlier than they expect, that they can contribute something, that they can actually grow the language. And I think a lot of ordinary developers, who even the ones who do make the effort to come to user groups, don't realize that they can have that sort of impact. But I think it'll be a little bit easier for us to sell that story when you've got people like vJUG and the LJC already doing this. And you can start to say, look, here are examples of what we did. We did the hack days on date and time. This made it into Java 8. And having these stories is a really good way to start this education. Whereas when we started, we were like, I'm not really sure what we can do, or we weren't even really, I don't think, certainly I wasn't really aware of the subtle differences between what was going through the JCP process, what was OpenJDK, and what fell into which of those categories.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, that the education is a really important piece of it. So educating on the acronyms and what it all means. I think Zero Turnaround did a great paper recently on summing that up for us. So any thoughts that you might have to share with us from JSR, Simon?
So, yeah, ZT or Rebel Labs, sponsor of the vJUG, awesome place. Did a paper on the future of Java, which involved JCP, JEPs, and a whole bunch. We brought Oleg on the panel as well to talk about that. Oleg, do you want to go into that in more detail?
Right. So, yeah, we did this. 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay. A report was done. So yeah. So yeah, at Rebel Labs we did a report on the everything Java and JVM and Java ecosystem in general, going from a bit of history and how it was all developed into current status, and we explained all the acronyms, and we provided this small, not a tutorial, but a how-to sort of get involved into maybe cloning and tinkering with the code of OpenJDK. And to sum it up, well, basically, if you want to somehow get on board with how to make future of Java more appropriate for yourself, and you're like, oh, I want Java to go into that direction, you will have to cover a little bit of education, which was provided by AJC locally. But now you can just go into that one place and download this report and go through basically all the necessary sections and kind of start navigating this world of different parties and parts that work well together. But you're if you do that on your own, it's kind of not easy, because you have to feel and establish a horizon for yourself, and it kind of gets fuzzy if you don't know what you're looking for. So we try to organize that in some sensible way, and it came out pretty well.
I think that takes care of the helping with the education. I think that's the very first step. So if people want to get started, they should start with educating themselves on the process.
Back with you, Heather.
What? You can't hear me? Did you say you can't hear me? No? Okay. Well.
I heard you fine.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I wanted to turn it now to Ed Burns, who can share with us the spec lead experience of Adopt-a-JSR. Ed's been a spec lead for a long time and participated in Adopt-a-JSR when it first started in 2012. So I wanted him to share his experience, and he put together a few slides that we presented together at Java 1 a couple weeks ago. So I'm sharing those with you now on the screen. And for the speaking, I'll turn it over to Ed, who can share his experience both before Adopt-a-JSR, during Adopt-a-JSR when it started in 2012, some of the lessons he's learned, and what he hopes to do in the future to leverage the community and get more participation into the Java E8 JSRs that he's leading now.
Thanks, Heather. And I'm going to rely on you
Ed,
to
sorry, I must just interject. I just
Sure.
want to say that the vJUG take no responsibility for what happens with you and that fan.
Oh, yeah, I know. It gets awfully hot in my office here with all these computers. So the fan is necessary. It's outside in Florida here. It's probably about 27 degrees. So we have to keep the temperature down however we can. Okay, so thank you for advancing the slides. I'm proud to say that we've been doing Adopt-a-JSR long before there was such a thing. You know, I really took the transparency that has been in JCP since version 2.4, really, at least in the kernel of the idea, and tried to push it as far as we can. With JSF, we were the first part of any portion of Java to go open source. And let me do an audio check. Can everyone hear me okay? Simon, you can nod if you can hear me okay. All right. And so we just had the 10-year anniversary of open source of Java, which was when the first part of JSF went open source. And we've just tried to use the community to get involved and help us out. We've done various fun things and also various practical things. On the fun side, we had a logo contest where we used the Jira voting feature, and a number of people could submit. We had 31 unique entries to design a logo for JSF, and the winner got a free book. And on a more practical side, we've used voting to help guide our priorities for where we're developing JSF in the future. If you could do advanced, please, Heather. Now, once Adopt-a-JSR started up and became to be more formal, we tried to use it for a specific nice-to-have technical task. And this actually proved to be too difficult and ended up not being done. And so there's a lesson learned here. Keep on this slide, but then I'll ask you to go to the next one shortly. The task was, JSF has lots of different moving parts of the specification. Unlike any other part of Java EE, it really spans lots of different tiers. Now, you could argue that that's one of the reasons why people don't like JSF, because you have to know a tag lib, you have to know the Java doc, there's all these different parts, there's JavaScript, but that's just kind of the nature of the beast when you're doing a web app UI thing. The other side of the coin is, of course, you could do VADIN, and then you're all pure Java. But then, if you're doing VADIN, your web developers, your web designers that like to work in terms of tags and CSS, they're kind of left out in the cold. So if you want to have a solution like JSF does, which it tries to blend both the web app way, where you have markup, and the Java developer way, where you have programming language constructs such as listeners and events, then you're going to have all of these different parts of the documentation. So we have all these different tools to generate this documentation, and we wanted them to have a coherent look that looked like the Java SE Java doc. That would require some skill in crafting the CSS and other little bits of these different parts of tools to make it provide a unified look. And that was what I wanted to use the Adopt-a-JSR program for. But unfortunately, the task was too big. And so if you could go to the next slide, the lesson I've learned as a spec lead is you have to really keep the task small and self-contained. And that's why I've got this little URL here at the bottom, sscce.org. It stands for Short Self-Contained Correct Example. And I like to bring that up because I think the single most valuable task the Adopt-a-JSR people can do is to make sure that our public issue tracker, our Jira, has issues that are in it that are easy to work with, and they have these SSCCEs attached to them. When it comes to implementation bugs, the very first thing you need to have is some little standalone WAR that doesn't have prime faces, rich faces, or whatever in it. It's just a standalone WAR that has just the problem that you'd like to solve, and that really makes it go quick. So what Martijn was saying with regard to what's valuable for them in using Adopt-a-JSR is how does it help them get their work done? Well, what's valuable for us is helping us identify and solve the technical problems that you're experiencing out in the field. So it's one area where the specification takes a back seat to the implementation. But really, when you're working with the technology, the implementation is what matters, right? I mean, that's where you're actually writing the code and trying to use it in production. So there's a bit of overlap between the implementation work and the specification. So my advice to other spec leads, if they're trying to leverage the Adopt-a-JSR, is remember, Adopt-a-JSR is for people who want to contribute, but don't have the time to be a full expert group member. So you can't really expect them to build up a lot of context and take on a huge burden of work. So these are the kinds of tasks that I think will be helpful for us in Java EE 8. Given a collection of JIRA issues, assure they have the right metadata. Their component and subcomponent are set correctly, for example. Define use cases for potential new features. If we have some time at the end of the session, I'd like to get some people to discussion about HTTP2 server push. In our expert group meeting during Java 1, Greg Wilkins was saying, he could only identify one compelling use case for HTTP2 server push. And I have to say, after thinking about it some, I also only have the same one, which is a web framework, such as JSF or anything else, that needs to leverage server push to send resources. So I don't want to deep dive too much into the technical aspect, but anyhow, it illustrates the need for using Adopt-a-JSR to define potential use cases for new features. Another thing that's useful is to proofread portions of the specification as we move forward in the JCP process with the different drafts. And finally, I put down there, advocate for non-supported platforms. JSF, the specification, for example, really just runs on Java EE containers, but people also have been using it on Google Cloud. But it's not really a supported feature to use it there because, for example, Google App Engine doesn't support JNDI. So we have some things that we need to use that depend on JNDI, and that doesn't work on Google App Engine. So if someone in the community really cared about making JSF work on Google App Engine, it would be a really great use case for Adopt-a-JSR because we don't really have the bandwidth to support all of the platforms. We need to focus on the platforms that matter to us. So thank you for that, Heather. And I don't have anything else to say, but I do hope there's some time to talk about server push.
Okay, yes, we are going to leave some time at the end for questions, so I think that's a good segue into the question that I had prepared for Arun, because I think some of your points are good as far as breaking out the tasks so that participants know what the spec leads are looking for, giving them small chunks of things to work on, and those suggestions that you made are great. So I'd like to ask Arun to share his experience that he had working with Adopt-a-JSR with both the Java user groups and the spec leads to bring more developer participation into Java EE 7, kind of at the later end of the spectrum, as the JSRs at that time for Java EE 7 really were a little bit further along in the process, kind of moving towards public review. So kind of share the experience of how we got the community involved in Java EE 7 to start with. Arun.
Yeah, sure. So it's funny, I think it was one of the LJC Adopt-a-JSR effort or something that Martijn or one of these guys were doing, and then it struck me, it's like, as they say, one of the best ideas that come to your mind is when you're running, when you're free, and it struck me, we should do something like this for Java EE 7, and so rightly, we started the effort late in terms of that we should do Adopt-a-JSR effort for Java EE 7, and then, but the best part was as soon as we said, okay, we're going to do something like this, pretty much right away the spec leads, the management chain at Oracle, all the engineers were excited about it, that yeah, we would love to get this feedback from the community. That's a positive sign. Then, when we reached out to the different Java user groups, literally in a matter of a couple of weeks, there were 20 Java user groups that got jumped on board. Yeah, we would love to test it out. We will do this. The important part from our perspective was to kind of set the bar that, guys, the Java EE 7 specs are late in the cycle at this point of time. So as much as we would love to get your feedback, you can't say that I don't like this feature, don't incorporate this feature, or add this new feature and things like that. So we had to set the bar very clearly. At this point, what is it that we're looking for? And that's where I worked with all the Java EE 7 spec leads. So we launched a page, Adopt-a-JSR page on glassfish.org, and there we said, here is what each spec lead is looking for help from. So for example, different specs were in different places. So we clearly identified 5 areas where each spec lead was looking for help, and then we circulated it. As expected, JSF servlets are pretty mature technology. There is so much you can do in Adopt-a-JSR over there. There was always more interest in technologies which are more modern, like WebSocket, JSON, Batch. More modern, rather not modern, but they were new to the platform. So those technologies were a lot more heavily adopted because that's a brand new spec, and there is always excitement around, I want to learn this technology. I want to put on my resume that, hey, I did Adopt-a-JSR for WebSocket. So those specs get a lot more heavy feedback. Some of the mature technologies like EJB, JSF, Servlet, they also got feedback as well. But in general, I think the effort was hugely successful. I was personally driving it, with a lot of Java user group leaders. That was a very exciting experience. And the good thing is now at Oracle, Reza Rahman is driving that pretty well. And the good thing is, that now this is Java EE 8. The effort has barely started. The fact that different JUG members and leaders are involved from the early beginning, they can literally, help drive the specification to quite an extent. They want to write a proposal, sure, go for it. One of the personal things that I would like to see, just like Red Hat, we have our CDI spec and Veeam validation spec out in the open source. That's not the case. Out in the open source in the sense, the source is in a GitHub repo as well. It's all text-based editing, ASCII doc stuff, which is not the case for other specs. Like IBM has gone open source with their spec as well. So I would highly encourage Oracle, my ex-colleagues, to put their spec in the public, because that further would enhance the level of participation that could happen, in the Oracle-led JSRs for Java EE 8. But I think it's a very fun experience. I would definitely be watching it from outside and sharing my feedback.
Okay, thanks, Arun. Yeah, I think your point is good. That we had some great participation with Java EE 7, and the Java EE 8 JSRs are just getting started now. So it's a great time to get involved with Adopt-a-JSR for Java EE 8. We have 8 JSRs already submitted to the JCP, and the expert groups are forming now. I'm showing the JSRs on my screen, the ones in the left-hand column already here. Those JSRs were just approved to continue development in the JCP in September, so their expert groups are forming, and I'm already working with the expert groups to kind of give the community those small tasks that they can work on, some of the things like Ed shared earlier that the spec leads are looking for. And I've already gotten interest from 12 Java user groups that definitely want to adopt these JSRs, so now is a great time to get involved. Join the project on java.net, the Adopt-a-JSR project, and indicate your interest there in the JSRs, and we'll be following up on an ongoing basis to have some sharing with the spec leads as well as with the evangelists and the user group leaders. So I think Simon wanted to have some questions from the audience. So I think we have about 20 minutes left, and I think maybe he even had some questions he wanted to ask of our panelists. So Simon, are you there?
Hey, yeah, I'm here. So yeah, we've got one question from the IRC chat room. If anyone else wants to ask any from the room, start thinking, or indeed in the chat room as well. So this is a question from Harmeet Singh, and he's wondering about the evolution of JavaFX and mentions that Oracle discuss integrating JavaFX with things like Swing. So I'm going to pass this to Ed, I guess.
I can actually talk about that a little bit. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Let me turn off my screen share because that has nothing to do with. Hold on, let me hang up the phone. And let me turn off the screen share so you can see me. Okay. Now, I can't really speak completely authoritatively on JavaFX, but I will say that the last time I went to Jazzoon, anyone remember Jazzoon? It's a Swiss IT conference. It's actually happening, today's the 16th, happening next Tuesday and Wednesday in Zurich. So unfortunately, I won't be able to go to JZOOM this year, but the last time I did present there, it was when JavaFX was just starting to come out, and they had a series of UI controls that were basically like swing controls. And I remember they were incredibly CPU intensive. It was like they just released them, and it was kind of silly because you have a button that would like display on the screen and use 80% of your CPU just to render itself. But they've since fixed that, and I do believe that at this point the standard party line of UIs with Swing is that, with JavaFX is that anything you could have done in Swing you could do in JavaFX and even better.
Awesome, thanks, thanks Ed. We've also got a question from the room in Geek Out UK, and this is from a heavy user of the vJUG as well. This is Carl Yockel. Carl.
I just wanted to ask, are there any particular new JSRs or existing JSRs that are in need of adopting?
So I'll pass this to Heather. Any JSRs that need adopting, Heather?
Yes. So the link that I had earlier on the screen, I can put it back on the screen. There are 8 new JSRs. I'll put it back on the screen now, but there are JSRs. 366 is the Java EE8 umbrella JSR, and they're just kind of 365 actually is CDI. So starting with JSR 365, that's CDI 2. So that just got started, as well as JSR 366, Java EE8, JSON binding, JMS 2.1, Servlet 4, JAX RS 2.1, MVC, that's a new JSR, JSR 371, and the JSR also that Ed's leading, JSF 2.3. So Ed's actually co-leading 2 JSRs of that list, JSF 2.3 as well as the Servlet 4. So all 8 of those JSRs are new JSRs that can definitely use the support of the developer community.
I'm going to interrupt here. If you're a developer who cares about Java Enterprise, a lot of Java EE8 is going to be enhancements on what is already there. And I think all of us, or most of us who have used Java EE7 recently, can probably agree it's a pretty damn good standard. It's highly productive, it's annotation-based, things generally kind of make sense. What's probably lacking is the gap between what I would say is the bleeding edge of software development practices, such as the JSON binding API, the WebSockets implementation, etc. So if you want to have an impact on how Java is going to be shaped going forwards with this interoperability with other languages like JavaScript and other paradigms, then JSONB, WebSockets, a couple of those newer technologies, is probably the area you want to focus. Because I think Oracle, Red Hat, and other institutions have got more than enough expertise to do the incremental updates that are required for servlets, JSF, JSPs, and so forth. So if you're going to focus on something, I would focus on those new specifications.
Okay, Ed, you had a question as well, Ed.
All right. Well, yeah, the question, we've got a few minutes here. Maybe we can also just take this to IRC later. But let me quickly explain the server push use case in HTTP2. Let me turn on screen share here. Start it. So the basic idea with HTTP2 server push is to allow the server. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see it.
All right. Allow the server to pre-populate the browser's cache. And so this is a particularly well-suited use case for web frameworks, not just JSF, but any web framework that maintains some form of UI state on the server, where the server knows when the browser asks for this web page, the server already knows, well, you're going to be asking me for these other things real soon anyway. Why don't I just give them to you before you ask for them? That's the basic idea with HTTP2 server push. And the way we're proposing to implement it is that when the server discovers, okay, they're asking for this page, they're going to need this style sheet and this script, we do this dispatch push request, which causes a synthetic GET to be sent back to myself, essentially, which would then be serviced in a separate thread and sent back in a normal fashion. So this is fine, and it makes sense, and it is the good use case for server push. But Greg Wilkins' question, which I am echoing here, is what other use cases are there for server push in HTTP2? Because I can't come up with any others, but I'm sure there are some out there.
I've got one straight away. So for our product, we have a performance analysis tool, which is a software as a service. We have daemons which run on the clients. We currently use WebSocket technology, not Java EE WebSockets. We use a third-party library for it. We would love to be able to pre-populate a browser's cache with metrics data, which HTML5 key value stores can already hold, manipulate, and have a really fast user experience for the end user who might be extremely remote from our server who's pushing the space. So that would be my personal use case.
I'm wondering if there might be some mobile use cases. I'm wondering if there might be some mobile use cases where, I mean, I don't know the mobile space very well, but I can imagine that certainly on initialization you might want to send a bunch of different sets of data down rather than just have to make lots of individual calls for that stuff. Maybe. Right.
Again, so it's the
other objects, right? I mean,
right. So, but it's all based on.
It's both. Device, you want to shove one packet of it. You want to shove multiple packets of it.
Right. Okay. Well, that's good.
I think
all right.
Yeah.
Another use case that I could think of, and maybe that is sort of a similar one, is a typical gaming scenario.
Right.
You know, a multiplayer game where people are playing on their browser. And HTTP2, by the way, is not just about server push. It's a two-way, full duplex communication. It's going to supersede WebSocket. So think about
I don't agree with you there.
No?
I think WebSocket is going to be WebSocket, and it's going to stay WebSocket. The key difference is WebSocket has a JavaScript API that goes along with it. HTTP server push will not have any such thing. So
well, then in that case, is HTTP2 not going to provide a full duplex bidirectional communication channel, or is it only server push?
It does, but it's only really for the purpose of it's an application. It's a lower level thing. It's not an application level protocol. The full duplex it's provided, but it's not designed for using messaging, or there's no application level API for it.
No, I understand, but and WebSocket is also pretty low level in that sense. So are you saying it's lower than WebSocket?
Yes, it is lower level than WebSocket, for sure. Because we will, WebSocket has that very nice W3C JavaScript API that we have exposed with the help of Adopt-a-JSR in the WebSocket Java API. But there will be no analogous thing for HTTP2 server push. But I think your point about games, about mobile, and about the jClarity profiling engine are some good use cases.
So a question from me then. Before we wrap up, so we're approaching the top of the hour. So if we take a look at Java EE over the last 10 years or so, maybe even more, you look at a technology like Spring, and just as an example, a technology that reacted to frailties in the Java specification. It took Java a long time to go through the specification, provide an equivalent in EJB3 and so forth. How can Java EE ever react as quickly as proprietary environments when the process does take so long and adoption is pretty slow? How can it react to those kind of things?
I think my line to that would be, as they say, premature standardization is evil. A classic example of that is, think about what happened in JSR 352. Spring Batch did a lot of shaking out, well tested. You don't want to standardize too early. So a lot of shaking out happened in Spring Batch. People knew exactly this is what they want. Finally, VMware decided to contribute to JCP. And they said, okay, we're going to be part of the JSR 352 expert group. Now think about as part of Java EE 7, we were thinking to standardize PaaS platform. If we would have done that, nobody knows at this point of time, what do you really mean by PaaS? You know, is there a standard for PaaS? Is there standards defined for PaaS? So I think in terms of Java EE, that's gonna be the nature of it. It's always gonna be a leapfrogging game. You know, Spring was defined primarily because of deficiencies in Java EE. Then Java EE 6 and 7 came along. They kicked the butts of Spring. Now they're moving ahead, and now Spring is catching up. So I think that's always going to be the case. And as they say, we need some inflation for growth, man. Spring is good.
Yeah, I tend to agree. In fact, it's, you know, the mantra is innovation happens elsewhere, and standardization is not. I mean, there is innovation in standardization, but it's the kind that is about providing a cohesive whole and integrating. You can bring innovation to that task, but there's no way that we can keep up with open source, or we really shouldn't. You know, it's about standardizing accepted best practices.
But while that's good, doesn't that just allow the market to go elsewhere rather than keeping the market?
Well, it allows them to go elsewhere, but as long as they stay, as long as it's either they stay within Java, or it's possible to provide analogs that also run in Java, then we can capture that and bring it back in. You know, I mean, here's another great example, and we talked about this at the Web Framework Smackdown, which might be another topic for a virtual JUG in the future. And my phone is ringing, and I have a call in 5 minutes, but I'll say real quick. The way the web has evolved, and we've had all these frameworks that have come up in the past few years with moving the state down to the client side, you know, AngularJS and Facebook React and such. That's an example where they left, you know, the innovation left and went away from Java, but there's only so much you can do with server-side Java. The browser is managed by W3C and driven in large part by whatever Google wants to do. So we in the Java world don't really have the mandate to dictate what they're doing in their sandbox.
Okay, awesome. So I think we're coming up to the top of the hour. So Heather, would you like to round up your troops and summarize the session?
Okay. Well, I think that we have to feedback from the Java user group, speaking from the perspective of the London Java community, as well as great feedback from Ed Burns, speaking on behalf of spec leads who are very eager to get the support of the community and the participation from the community, and also appreciate the perspective that Arun brought to our panel as a Java EE advocate and developer evangelist. I think all of us working together can create better standards in the future for all Java developers to use. So I would encourage all of you out there to get involved in the JCP, either directly through the JCP or through the Adopt-a-JSR program at adopt-a-JSR.org, or also on the OpenJDK side, there's OpenJDK itself as well as Adopt OpenJDK, so those projects are out there. And I have links provided on the slides that I shared, and I'm sure Simon will make those available on the vJUG site. So I look forward to future contributions from all of the vJUG members, and congratulations again on your first 2,000 members. That's a great achievement, and I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we're perhaps thinking about doing with the vJUG is to maybe do some Adopt-a-JSR virtually, so maybe do some online hackathons or something around JSRs, so we can maybe crowdsource that and see if that's of interest to anyone. Any final thoughts from the panel?
Yes.
So basically, this is a call to all the developers to step forward and contribute through the Adopt OpenJDK program. It's a great way to learn all the aspects of Java that you don't read about in your normal books and blogs, or you know, the courses or other work experiences you've had. It's very easy to step in. We've got virtual machines to help you out. We've got getting started kits to help you out. We've got willing developers and community members in the LJC and many parts of JUGs in all over the world who will step in. There's a mailing list where you can post your questions and get answers. So basically exciting times, and the build process is far better than what it was 3 years ago. So there are no hindrances that we were talking about. Tisha mentioned earlier, it's hard to get in. It's actually reversed now. It's very easy to get in.
I'm going to talk to selfish reasons. If you truly want to become a JavaScript developer or a Ruby developer in your future career, then don't do anything. Just don't contribute to Java. Don't worry about it. You'll be happy using Node.js on the server. You'll be happy using Ruby as a beautifully statically compiled, safe language for all of your developer needs. And I don't think I need to say anything more. Right? If you guys want the Java to be the language and the platform that's going to help you, then selfishly come and help yourself. Oracle and the JCP have now opened up. They've now made it very easy to do so. So there's no excuse anymore. We're all doing it. We're actually kind of having fun doing it, which is a bit scary. So come and join us.
Okay. Any final thoughts from anyone else on the panel?
Well, I might have something. So the first step, if you want to join but don't know how or don't know where to get information, but you have something to say, then the first step and the easiest step would be to spot something that is not right, that somebody else might improve. So the first step would be just go and complain. Just communicate with us, and we will get you on board and like hold hands and get you into all relevant communities, and you'll get started pretty easily.
And you can make a difference. It's surprising. When we first started looking at it and we saw that the date time needed TCK, we were like, oh, okay, we can do some testing. And it ends up being a much bigger job. We got much more involvement and had much bigger impact on Java SE8 than we ever imagined that we would have. So you can, not everything is necessarily given on that scale, but you can make a big impact. And it's going to be awesome for your career.
Yeah, I guess I should mention like Facelets. Facelets itself came from open source, and we found the guy Jacob Hookum. He was contributing. We invited him to join the JCP. He came and gave a Java 1 talk, and that's a really great example of how you can make a difference.
Okay.
Okay, awesome. So I think there's some good final thoughts there. And thanks very much. I'd like to say a particular thanks to Heather for organising the panel, and obviously for all the great work you do on the JCP committee. Thanks to our panel here in London. And of course, thanks to our live audience here at Geek Out UK. And I'd just like to finish by thanking all the members of the vJUG for really contributing and making the vJUG awesome. Here's to our second year, and our next session is from memory around the 27th or 28th, I think 28th of October, and it's the Vencat talking about reactive Java. So that's going to be an awesome session. Okay, so thanks again to the entire panel, and thanks for everyone for contributing online and at IRC. See you next time.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.